Drogon soared into the twilight sky, the fading sun throwing long, crimson shafts of light across his obsidian scales. He carried with him the memory of her. Daenerys, once mother of dragons, Khaleesi of the great grass sea, breaker of chains, gone now, her final breath stilled in a distant land that would never know the hush of her voice again. In the gloom of sunset, the great beast kept vigil over the emptiness that lay in her absence, for he had not only lost his mother but also the only living bond that had nurtured his fiery spirit. His roars echoed a lament across the waters, across the scattered isles that shimmered with shadows, a mourning the world might never truly comprehend. He had flown long and far, guided by instinct and some faint echo of her will that lingered in him. The chain-enslaved cities to the east called to him with old memory, and so too did the scorched plains where Daenerys had first learned to rule. But neither called louder than the haunted place that had once given rise to dragons beyond counting, an empire built on fire and blood, old Valyria. Perhaps he did not know the name as mortals do, yet he felt the pull in the marrow of his ancient bones. Something there was stirring, or perhaps it was only his grief that needed a place as forsaken as he was. Either way, the beast set himself on that lonely course, each wing beat pushing him toward the doom-laden peninsula that had devoured so many souls and left behind nothing but memory and ash. Great waves lashed at jagged rocks along the coastline when at last Drogon arrived. Night had fallen, but beneath the moon's pallid glow, the ruins of Valyria rose in stark silhouette. Twisted spires, blackened from centuries of scorching ruin, reached like skeletal fingers toward the sky. The city's once mighty walls lay collapsed in places, half swallowed by a labyrinth of canals choked with silt and overgrown by ghostly vines. Beyond these were labyrinthine streets that no longer welcomed travelers. They were serpents of stone curling through the decayed heart of a civilization that had dared to harness dragons and was undone by its own hubris. Drogon alighted upon a fractured tower that jutted from the rubble. Loose stones crumbled beneath his massive claws. A swirl of dust rose in protest around him, swirling upward, catching the moonlight. For a moment, he stretched out his long neck and bellowed a roar that rolled through the abandoned city like thunder in a dead sky. It was not a challenge, merely a statement that he had arrived, an echoing cry that declared he was no longer the sole occupant of that hush. It was a cry of grief as much as triumph, torn from the depths of a creature bound to the memory of a lost queen. Silence answered him, a hush of centuries' worth of sorrow, as if the cursed city recognized a kindred spirit. Broken arches and collapsed colonnades stood like tombstones beneath the slow dance of the stars. In the gloom, shadows shifted, remnants of sorcery or illusions conjured by the mind. Strange lights glimmered in the distant recesses of ruined courtyards, faint glows that vanished when looked at too directly. The sizzling hiss of ancient magic lingered like a half-forgotten whisper. Drogon snorted, smoke spiraling from his nostrils, as he cautiously hopped to a lower level of the tower, searching for a place to rest. He carried no burden now, Daenerys' body long since taken from that terrible field of betrayal, but whether buried, burned, or hidden, none could say. Perhaps Drogon alone knew. Yet an emptiness weighed upon him, as if her spirit still clung to his scales, urging him forward. Each breath he took was heavy, exhaled with a low rumble that spoke of longing. In the stillness of old Valyria, he found an echo of his own soul. Both had been shattered, orphaned, and cast aside by the tides of fate. Ruin recognized ruin. In the silence, he spread his wings and glided from the tower's remains into the labyrinth of rubble-strewn streets. Here were once proud sculptures that had toppled ages ago, their dragon-shaped heads severed from bodies that wore the carved faces of long-dead Valyrian lords. The ground cracked beneath Drogon's weight, sending tremors that disturbed quiet pools of stagnant water. Some hidden creature in a crumbled courtyard hissed and slithered away, a thing that had not seen the sun in years uncounted. Still, Drogon pressed onward, compelled to explore the center of the once great city, as if searching for a secret buried amid the ruins. Sometimes he paused, craning his neck to examine carved basalt walls, where runes of an ancient language traced patterns that told of draconic glory and forbidden spells. Even with all the intelligence dragons possessed, these words were beyond him, yet something reverberated in his chest, a sense of recognition. The faint memory of Daenerys' voice came to him, the warmth of her presence, the commands in Valyrian she had spoken, the lullabies in tongues half lost to time. It stirred an ache that made his nostrils flare and a shiver run across his scaled hide. At length, he emerged into a broad forum of shattered pillars, each one angled differently like broken teeth in a beast's mouth. The platform at the center featured a wide mosaic, fractured in places, but still discernible. Depicted there was an ancient scene of dragons swirling among blazing skies, while robed figures below cast their arms upward in worship or plea. Even in its disrepair, the mosaic pulsed with lingering potency, a glimpse of what Valyria had once aspired to be. Drogon circled it warily, smoke curling from his jaws. Something about the arrangement of the runes and the design of the dragons reminded him of home, a feeling that tugged at the corners of his feral mind. He sank onto his haunches, folded his wings, and settled as though listening for a heartbeat. The wind whispered through the labyrinth of ruin, carrying with it the scent of salt and the hush of centuries. Night deepened. The stars overhead were brilliant, untainted by torchlight or human clamor. From time to time, strange constellations seemed to shift. Or perhaps it was only the dancing reflection from the fragments of glassy black stone that littered the ground. Drogon was alone, and yet he was not. There was a peculiar presence in that abandoned city, some memory or echo that seemed to swirl in the corners of the broken walls. Sometimes it felt like eyes were watching him from the shadows. But if there were watchers, they made no move to approach. Dragons had long been gone from these ruins, no living soul having survived the doom to speak of it firsthand. Many who had dared to come hereafter had vanished. Whatever perils lurked among the wreckage, Drogon was more formidable than any. Restless, he prowled through the courtyard, occasionally stretching his serpentine neck to peer beneath collapsed archways, searching for something intangible. He could sense, faintly, that old Valyria had not entirely died. There was still some spark of the old power lingering here, something that might call to him in his sorrow. The hours stretched on. The moon drifted across the sky, bathing the ruins in silver. Drogon found a massive chamber, half a dome that had caved in on one side, but whose floor was still largely intact. Shattered columns and broken marbles lay scattered across the mosaic floor, which depicted swirling patterns of rubies, onyx, and jade. Broken glass crunched beneath his claws as he entered, his breath rolling in slow, heavy gusts. In the far corner, what remained of a dais jutted upward, its surface etched with shapes reminiscent of eggs. The detail was so fine, despite the damage, that Drogon paused. Something about that dais anchored his attention. The memory of Daenerys came flooding back, the day he and his siblings hatched from the fires of her pyre. Her tears, her laughter, the half-gasp, half-laugh that escaped her lips when she found them alive in the ashes of Khal Drogo's funeral. Her outstretched arm as she urged them to take their first steps into the world. Drogon shuddered, releasing a low keen. He approached the dais, warily lowering his head to sniff at the carved surface. It reeked of dust and time, yet beneath that, there was a trace of something else, like a coal not quite extinguished. He was drawn to it. With a gentleness belying his colossal form, he brushed aside some fallen debris with one massive claw. The stone there was inlaid with veins of some glimmering metal that caught the moonlight. A faint glow pulsed, almost imperceptible. Could it have been imagination, a reflection of the sky? Drogon couldn't know. The old magic resonated, fueling his instincts. Despite the sorrow that weighed on him, he felt a stirring of life deep in his chest, like the echo of an ember that refused to go out. He exhaled, letting a small flame light the dust-laden air, and watched how it danced across the chipped carvings. Night gave way to the first glimmers of dawn before he finally lay down, exhausted from his journey, and the emotional turmoil that coursed through him. His scaled head rested against the debris, half curled around the dais, as though he would guard it in his sleep. A sliver of new sunlight broke through a crack in the dome above, illuminating the mosaic floor. Dark shapes scattered, perhaps creatures of the night, or illusions cast by the interplay of light and ruin. Drogon's eyes slowly drifted shut, and for the first time since Daenerys' final moment, the great beast sank into something like rest. He dreamt, or something akin to dreaming, in the strange way dragons might. Shadows of memory flickered. The stench of the Dothraki Sea, the snowy ramparts of Winterfell, the ruin and devastation of King's Landing. And always Daenerys was there, her hand extended, her hair silver against the sky, her eyes fierce with determination or soft with love. There was a clarity to it all that bit at his heart, and a sureness that he was lost without her. In the dream her voice murmured in a language older than men, words that resonated like ancient spells. When he awoke, the sun was higher, streaming through the break in the dome. Dust motes danced in the light. He lifted his head, blinking away the dream, and letting a heavy breath escape his jaws. Then he rose, muscles rippling beneath his ebony scales, and stretched his wings. Hunger called, a primal need that overcame sorrow for a few moments. With a mighty push, he launched through the broken dome, sending shards of stone cascading. The skies above Valyria belonged to him now, and he would hunt to survive. Strange birds scattered from the nearby coastline as he circled. In the far reaches of the ruin, some twisted forms of life might roam, but without man or livestock, game would be scarce. He spotted movement in the lagoon just beyond the city's ragged edge. Something large lurked beneath the surface, stirring the muddy water. With thunderous beats of his wings he descended, fire flickering in his throat. A monstrous reptile, scaly and ancient, rose from the lagoon's depths to challenge him. Perhaps a mutated descendant of crocodiles, or some older creature shaped by the doom's lingering corruption. It lunged with jaws wide, and Drogon answered with gouts of flame. The battle was swift, primal, and savage. He seized the creature in his talons, scorching its hide until it fell limp. With raw ferocity, he fed, tearing flesh to satisfy his hunger. Smoke swirled around them, anointing the ruin with the old ritual of survival. Life taken to sustain life. When he was done, the lagoon rippled with red-tinged water. He roared once more at the silent horizon, then took flight, carrying scraps of sustenance back toward the dome that had captured his interest. He returned to that dais, the old mosaic, and settled again. As he lay there, the faint glow in the stone seemed more pronounced, as though it was calling to him. He felt warmth throbbing beneath the surface, and though he could not speak, something in him responded. He turned in circles, scraping aside rubble, shaping a crude nest. Steam curled from his nostrils, as if in frustration that he could not bring forth the same energies that Daenerys once commanded. Days slipped by, marked by hunts at dawn and twilight. The remains of old Valyria revealed its labyrinth of corridors, galleries, and half-submerged plazas. Occasionally, Drogon landed atop a spire or tower to survey the horizon, searching for any sign of another living dragon or the approach of men. None came. The city remained a ghostly domain, and he the solitary monarch. Unspoken memories taunted him, and his reptilian mind circled endlessly around the question why he remained. He had the entire world to roam, but this city's lonely, haunted grandeur bound him as surely as any chain. On the 10th day, a change in the air prickled his scales. A thunderstorm rolled in from the sea, black clouds swirling over the peninsula. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the shattered skyline in eerie bursts. The wind howled among the broken towers, wailing like a chorus of ghosts. Drogon took shelter beneath a half-collapsed archway connected to the dome structure, coiled protectively around the dais where he had cleared away debris. Rain lashed the mosaic floor, hissing against scattered coals of a small fire head stoked from dry wood and ancient timbers. In the flashes of lightning, the metal veins and the dais shimmered, each pulse synchronizing with the storm's electrifying energies. Drogon's eyes narrowed, fixed on the dais. The glow was brighter now, unmistakable. It was not lightning's reflection. Somehow, the dais was alive with a flickering luminosity, as though it breathed in time with the thunder. The dragon felt an old stirring within him, primal yet familiar. He rose, water streaming off his scales, and stretched his neck to graze the surface of the stone with the tip of his snout. The moment he touched it, a spark jolted through him, and he recoiled with a hiss, smoke churning from between his teeth. Lightning struck a nearby tower. Thunder followed, a deafening crash that rattled the broken city. The dais flared in the gloom, and Drogon let out a roar that was half rage, half wonder. Something was awake here, something that responded to the presence of a living dragon. His instincts surged. He fanned his wings, sending droplets of rain scattering, then hunched over the stone dais as though to protect it. Another bolt lit the sky, and for an instant the entire dome was awash in brilliant light. Drogon roared at the heavens, exhaling a hot torrent of flame. The rain hissed against it, steam rising in billowing clouds. All around him the echoes of his fury reverberated against basalt walls. He released another blast, directed downward now, bathing the dais in dragonfire. The stone glowed, and the metal inlay turned molten in places, swirling into new shapes. Something beneath the dais groaned, and the floor cracked. A wave of shimmering heat surged up from the mosaic, enveloping the entire space. The storm above howled, as if the heavens recognized this awakening. Drogon's muscles quivered. He felt the tension coiling inside him, the same tension he had experienced in the far-off land when he was first born amid flames. Moments passed. The storm raged overhead, but the dais no longer glowed with such intensity. Steam and smoke obscured everything. Drogon coughed a deep, guttural sound, the heat in his throat mingling with the damp air. He peered through the swirl of vapor to see if he had unearthed something, but all that remained was a fracture in the floor where molten patterns cooled. The dais, now deformed, lay quiet. The metal no longer shimmered, though it was still red-hot in some places. The magic, if it was magic, had retreated once more into the silence. Yet Drogon felt a spark of hope. Perhaps it was only the savage pride of a dragon having conjured such a display, or a faint memory of Daenerys' presence in the forging fires. Whatever it was, he guarded the dais all through the night, while the storm raged and eventually passed, leaving the sky empty of stars. He did not sleep, not truly. His eyes flickered in the darkness, scanning every flicker of shadow for a sign. In the days that followed, the city basked beneath a grim gray sky, the weather heavy with humidity, and the smell of brine. Drogon ventured out to hunt again. He returned with the carcass of a sea creature, dragging it across the ruined causeways, leaving a trail of wet sludge behind him. Later, he circled overhead, scanning the broken structures for any sign of life or threat. He found only lizards skittering away, or the occasional swirl of mist in the corridors. The dais remained at the back of the dome, silent. The molten edges had cooled into jagged lumps of dark metal that glimmered with flecks of silver. At times, Drogon would nudge these lumps, letting out a plaintive croon as though urging them to answer. Eventually, he set about shaping a nest of sorts around the dais, pushing fallen stones and rubble aside, scraping the floor in rhythmic motions, occasionally applying bursts of flame to soften or reshape the debris. It was a crude imitation of what Daenerys had once provided for the dragon eggs she had hatched, a phenomenon he only dimly recalled. But something deep in his instincts guided him to do this, as if an echo of her motherly bond now compelled him to create a place of nurturing. If the dais was to serve some greater purpose, he would ensure it was well guarded. Weeks passed in a haze of hunting, resting, and tending to the nest. The city remained quiet, broken only by the gusts of wind that howled through the archways or the trickle of water through the old canals. Bright green vines clung to the cracks in the stones, flowering in bizarre patterns. Occasionally, plumes of steam would rise from fissures in the ground, hinting at pockets of volcanic activity that still smoldered beneath the peninsula. Drogon grew accustomed to these silent phenomena. He became the solitary warden of old Valyria's labyrinth, unchallenged and unseen by men. Through it all, the memory of Daenerys lingered like a phantom. He dreamed of her face, her laughter, her rage. He remembered her gentleness and the fierceness of her rule. She had been a paradox, both storms and soft breezes contained in one. His life had begun in the flames she lit. Now he stood watch in a land of ash, with only her memory to guide him. Sometimes he roared into the emptiness, as if calling her name. But the only answer was the echo of his own cry among the broken domes. One night, as he slumbered beside the dais, a whisper of movement stirred in the rubble. Drogon snapped awake, eyes blazing. His body coiled, ready to release flame at the slightest threat. At first, he saw nothing, only the labyrinth of shadows cast by moonlight through the cracks in the dome. He listened. A faint scraping sound echoed from somewhere in the darkness, near a half-collapsed corridor that led deeper beneath the structure. With a low growl, Drogon rose, smoke curling from his lips. He prowled toward the noise, aware of how his massive body brushed against the walls, sending bits of stone falling. The corridor sloped downward, into the earth, its walls lined with archaic inscriptions. Strands of pale fungus glowed faintly, giving off just enough light to see by. Carefully, he inched forward until the passage opened into a chamber cluttered with broken urns and half-buried chests. Vines trailed from the ceiling, and small creatures skittered away at his approach. A wet, pungent smell hung in the air, decay and stagnant water. He saw them then, lumps of what looked like pale, calcified shells scattered among the debris. Some were shattered, others were partially intact but covered in centuries of grime. He recognized these forms as dragon eggs, ancient, petrified husks, perhaps left behind when Valyria fell. His eyes widened, a flicker of red dancing in their depths. Carefully, he nudged one with his muzzle. It was cold, inert, and unresponsive. Yet the mere sight of it sent a tremor through him. Another memory surfaced. Daenerys in a tent, turning eggs over in a brazier of red-hot coals, the seeds of their birth. Was it possible these ancient shells still contained any spark of life? The notion seemed absurd. They were relics of a time before the doom. Yet, he could not deny the curiosity that gnawed at him. One by one, he gathered what intact shells he could find, gingerly lifting them in his claws, carrying them back to the dome, where he had prepared his makeshift nest. Some were cracked, chipped beyond hope. Others had small fractures, but remained mostly whole. Their surfaces were dull, their once vibrant scales now tarnished. But in each of them, Drogon sensed possibility. Or perhaps he only hoped. Gently, he placed them around the dais. There were 5 that looked reasonably intact, though all were riddled with hairline cracks and covered in layers of dust. He turned them with his snout, pushing them into the shallow depression he had carved in the center of the floor, near where the molten metal had once glowed. Then he curled his body around them, enveloping them in the warmth of his scales. The nest was complete in some primitive sense. From that night on, he kept vigil. Hour by hour, day by day, he warmed the eggs with his own body, sometimes unleashing careful breaths of flame to bathe them in heat. He roamed less, only hunting for short intervals, before returning to his precious charges. He watched them in the flickering torchlight he had conjured from scattered planks and tinder. Time seemed to blur, the days melding into nights, all overshadowed by the single purpose of trying to coax life from these petrified shells. Instinct and memory guided him, the memory of Daenerys' faithful watch over the eggs that had once contained him, Rhaegal and Viserion. Yet doubt lingered. They were old, these relics, perhaps too old. The lines of fracture across their surfaces showed no sign of repair. They remained stubbornly cold, even against his immense heat. Sometimes, in frustration, Drogon would roar at them, as if commanding them to stir. Other times he would press them gently, as if in question. He was met only with silence. More storms came and went, rattling the rooftops and sending torrents of rain to flood the corridors. Sometimes lightning lit the dome once more, and he would use those fierce energies as an excuse to pour additional fire over the nest, hoping the combination of scorching flames and roiling thunder might spark the old Valyrian magic. Still, the eggs remained sealed, their shells unyielding. He carried them from place to place, searching through the labyrinth for any residual sites of power. He found crypts, lined with murals of dragonkind. He found altars that reeked of blood sacrifice. He found vents of steaming volcanic breath that hissed from fissures in the earth. He tried them all, but no sign of life emerged. During those expeditions, his mind would wander. He would think of Daenerys' final days, the heartbreak that had consumed her, the betrayal in King's Landing, her death, so sudden, so final, tearing a piece of him away as well. She had dreamed of breaking the wheel, of forging a new future for the realms of men, a future freed from tyranny. Now she was gone and the dream with her. Drogon's only solace was in this flicker of possibility that he might resurrect something of her vision by bringing new life into the world. He clung to that, even as the eggs lay silent. Weeks stretched into months. The once scorching summer faded into a cooler season, though old Valyria's climate remained temperamental, dominated by thunderstorms and the slow poison of the doom-laden atmosphere. Vines continued to overtake some of the lesser towers, but Drogon's domain in the dome and its surrounding corridors was kept mostly clear. He paced often, wings twitching, occasionally letting out roars that shook loose rubble. Still, no one came. Merchants, pirates, and explorers had learned the stories. Old Valyria had a new guardian, a monstrous black dragon that had claimed the ruined city for itself. Only the bravest or most foolish would dare approach. In the quiet hours of a late afternoon, sunbeams penetrated the cracks in the dome, slanting across the dais and illuminating the eggs. Drogon perched beside them, half dozing, when a subtle shift drew him from his slumber. He lifted his head, smoke curling from his nostrils, and stared. At first, he thought he must be dreaming, for the lines across one egg shell seemed to shift, as though the pattern of cracks had changed. He rumbled deep in his throat and leaned closer. The shell appeared the same, dull and silent. He exhaled a short burst of flame, just enough to warm the surface. A trick of the light. Possibly. But he swore he had seen movement. He continued his vigil, his heart pounding. At intervals, he would apply heat or gently roll the eggs. Nothing changed, yet the fleeting glimpse of motion haunted him. Soon, as shadows lengthened, he turned his attention to the swirling gloom outside. Nightfall approached. Perhaps the flicker had been an illusion, a tortured hope, conjured by months of waiting. He had almost convinced himself of that when he heard it. A faint tapping sound, so soft that any human ear might have mistaken it for a distant drip of water. But to Drogon, it was as clear as a bell. He froze, his tail lashing the ground. The tapping came again, a soft staccato from within one of the eggs. The dragon's eyes grew wide, pupils narrowing to slits. A surge of triumph and panic raced through him. He let out a croon, half desperate, half joyful. Nudging the eggs into a tighter cluster, he carefully wrapped his body around them, forming a scaly barrier. The gloom of night settled over the dome, and in that hushed darkness, the tapping continued, sometimes fading, sometimes intensifying. Drogon urged them with soft rumbles, small bursts of warmth, as if whispering encouragement in the only language he knew. Hours passed in a symphony of hope and tension. Gradually, the first egg that stirred developed a distinct crack, a tiny fissure that glimmered faintly. Drogon watched, rapt, as the fissure grew. He recalled how Daenerys had watched him peck his way into the world, how her face had shone with awe and love. He felt her absence acutely in that moment. Yet her spirit was there too, guiding him, urging him onward. At last, the shell began to chip away. A small piece broke loose, clattering onto the dais. Drogon hardly dared to breathe. A faint squeak emanated from within. Another piece fell, then another, until a claw, tiny, pale, with a faint sheen of black, emerged. The dragonette inside struggled, tapping and scratching at the confines of its ancient prison. Drogon extended his snout, gently scraping away fragments of shell with the tip of his muzzle. There came a triumphant squeal, and the newborn creature's head appeared. Its scales were dark, though not the inky black of Drogon's. Under the flickering torchlight, they shimmered with flecks of copper or bronze. Piece by piece, the hatchling pried itself free. Its body was small enough to fit in the palms of a man's hands, should a man dare. Its wings were leathery, half unfurled. It blinked large, curious eyes and let out a high-pitched cry. Drogon's throat rumbled with a sound akin to a purr, welcoming the new life. He lowered his head so the hatchling could press against his warm scales. For a moment, Father and child gazed upon each other. This was not just a single egg that had hatched. It was the promise that dragons would live on, even after Daenerys' light had been extinguished. Minutes later, a crack splintered across a second egg. Then a third. The nest stirred with the shuffle and scrape of life emerging. Drogon watched, his massive form trembling with excitement and fear. He tried to assist gently, but his claws were huge and lethal. He had to be cautious not to harm the fragile shells. One by one, the hatchlings slipped into the world, each trembling, each squeaking or crying out for warmth. Their scales were variations of dark hues, some leaning toward greenish undertones, others shimmering with hints of gold or silver. But they were all bound by the same legacy, the blood of the dragon. When the last egg cracked, Drogon was nearly delirious with exultation. 5 hatchlings, each small and vulnerable, but each carrying the flame that had once propelled Daenerys Targaryen across continents. They huddled around Drogon, pressing close to his warmth, squealing for comfort. He unfurled a wing, creating a living canopy. The nest was alive with the shuffle of tiny claws, the flick of miniature tails, and the bright, inquisitive eyes of a new generation. In that moment, the sorrow that had weighed upon him since Daenerys' passing loosened, if only slightly. Grief did not vanish. He felt her absence keenly, as he always would. But in the flickering glow that illuminated the nest, Drogon sensed the renewal of hope. Life had found a way, here in these ancient ruins, despite the doom and the centuries of despair. Perhaps Daenerys' spirit lived on in these small, squeaking forms, each a promise that her legacy would not be forgotten. He lowered his great head among them, letting them climb onto his muzzle, nip gently at his scales, and cry out for food. Tenderly he turned, stretching his neck to retrieve scraps from the kill he had brought earlier. The hatchlings responded to the scent of blood with eagerness. One by one they pecked and tore at the flesh, learning the taste of sustenance. Drogon watched them with patient, fiery eyes, guiding them with gentle nudges. The biggest of the brood, a scaled hatchling tinged with dark crimson, snatched morsels aggressively, establishing its dominance. A smaller sibling hissed in protest, and they grappled briefly before Drogon intervened with a firm rumble. As the feeding continued, the first hints of dawn touched the sky, sending shafts of light through the cracks in the dome. The new day revealed the nest in stark detail. 5 hatchlings, each the miracle of a forgotten heritage, and a solitary black dragon standing guard over them. The mosaic floor, chipped and scorched, held the imprint of their birth. Shards of eggshell lay scattered, shining like jewels in the early light. Drogon spread his wings, letting the golden rays brush across his scales and those of his brood. He thought of Daenerys, imagining how she would have smiled to see this new beginning. She had given her life in pursuit of change, but too many forces had converged against her. Now, if any part of her dream persisted, it was here, in the heart of old Valyria, among the ruins of an empire built by dragons. Something in Drogon's chest swelled, a fierce pride that this legacy survived. He huddled with the hatchlings, crooning soft notes of reassurance. Their bellies full, they nestled around him, miniature wings folded, eyes drooping with fatigue. In that quiet intimacy, Drogon caught a glimpse of what Daenerys must have felt when she first held her newly hatched trio so many years ago. A sense of awe, of boundless possibility. The hatchlings were too young to know their mother's name, or the tragedies that had befallen the world that birthed them. Yet in their innocence, they carried a spark that might rekindle more than just dragon fire. They might rekindle hope for a future beyond war, tyranny, and betrayal. Outside, in the open air, the rest of old Valyria stretched silent and haunted. Crumbling towers cast long shadows across the ashen ground. Ancient carvings told stories of triumph and downfall, conquests and curses. In the far distance, the sea shimmered under the dawn sun, carrying centuries of secrets in its tides. It was a land of ghosts, yet no longer entirely forsaken. For within those blackened stones, new hearts beat, new flames burned. Drogon closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the rising sun seep into his scales. A rumble deep in his throat conveyed contentment mixed with longing. The memory of Daenerys would never fade, nor would the sorrow of her loss. But he could continue, through these young ones, through the guardianship of a land that once held dominion over dragons and magic. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted his bulk to shield the hatchlings from a draft of cold morning air. They burrowed closer, squeaking softly, a chorus of new life. The hours passed, and day claimed the sky. Drogon roused to find the hatchlings stirring with cautious curiosity. They nipped at each other and explored his folded wings, tiny claws scraping over his scales. Occasionally, they flapped their stunted wings in a comical attempt at flight, managing little more than awkward hops. He guided them gently, letting them roam the space of the dome, but always keeping them in sight. They were precious beyond measure, vulnerable despite their eventual destiny to grow large and fearsome. Over the next days, the brood learned their first lessons in survival. Drogon brought them morsels of meat and water, shading them from scorching midday sun, warming them with periodic bursts of flame whenever night chilled the ruins. They began to recognize the vibrations of his thunderous roar as a call to gather. By the end of the first week, each could manage a small sputter of flame, a mere candle compared to Drogon's inferno, but an achievement that made them screech proudly. One evening, he led them to a secluded courtyard where the overgrown vegetation offered some morsels of insects and small creatures. The hatchlings scampered clumsily across broken tiles, chasing lizards and squealing at every discovery. Their little roars echoed among the pillars, and the sound made Drogon's heart surge. It was as if the city breathed again, awakened from centuries of gloom. High above, stars glittered like watchful eyes, observing this improbable renaissance. Each day, the hatchlings grew bolder. They followed him through corridors, weaving around collapsed statues. Sometimes they would squeak in alarm when confronted by slithering shapes in the shadows, but Drogon was there, rearing up to protect them with savage roars and plumes of flame. Little by little, they learned that they were, indeed, the apex creatures of this forsaken domain. Their confidence swelled, and so did their curiosity. With each passing sunrise, their scales took on deeper colors, their wings stretched further, and their eyes shone with the spark of draconic intelligence. Though sorrow remained an undercurrent in Drogon's existence, he found his days filled with purpose. Tending to the brood left little time for mourning, yet his memories of Daenerys never left him. Sometimes, as he curled around the hatchlings at night, he would gaze into the emptiness, and remember how she once lulled him to rest with soft words in a language that evoked the oldest magics. He wondered if her spirit could see him now, if she took solace in knowing that dragons would continue to shape the world, even if her reign had ended too soon. Seasons began to turn in earnest. Though old Valyria's climate was erratic, the days cooled, and storms battered the peninsula more frequently. The brood developed a wariness of the howling gales, sheltering in their dome while Drogon braced himself at the entrance, wings spread to keep the wind from scattering them. The hatchlings no longer fit neatly under his wings. They had grown quickly, each the size of a large dog now, their limbs sturdy, their wings capable of brief glides. They squabbled often, testing hierarchies among themselves. The largest male, the one streaked with bronze, displayed an independent streak that made him challenge Drogon's authority with hissing or mock charges. Drogon would snarl back, unleashing a burst of flame, and the defiant one would skitter away, chastised but unbroken. Amid these minor conflicts, bond and loyalty were also forged. They recognized Drogon as their protector, their teacher. When he roared in warning, they scattered behind him, eyes glinting with primal fear or readiness to fight. When he brought food, they rushed to feed, each trying to outmatch the others, but always checking for permission in the tilt of Drogon's head. Their world was small yet, contained within the labyrinth of Valyria's ruins. But it was enough for them to learn the ways of dragons, the ways Daenerys once nurtured in her beloved brood. In quiet hours, Drogon showed them the dais where they had hatched, nudging them to remember the significance of that place. The cracked mosaic that had once glowed with ancient energies lay dormant, but they sniffed at the cooled metal lumps and scratched them, curious. None could recall the moment of their birth, but Drogon's stance and the rumbling in his throat suggested the dais was sacred. They seemed to sense a hush in the air there, a lingering presence that transcended time. Thus life continued. No men came to challenge them, no armies marched to claim old Valyria. Rumors in far-flung ports might have told tales of a black dragon lurking amid the ruins, perhaps accompanied by smaller beasts. But few had reason to brave those shores. Meanwhile, the brood grew, honed their hunting skills, tested each other's strength. They soared briefly on the updrafts, their wings beating the smoky air. And Drogon watched them, a silent guardian. Each day, they grew more like the unstoppable force Daenerys had once unleashed on the world. If these children ever left old Valyria, they would carry its secrets with them. In time, maybe they would test the skies beyond. For now, they remained bound to their father, to this domain haunted by the echoes of a grand empire's fall. And Drogon, in turn, was bound by love lost and love renewed, a cycle of life that had begun in the ashes of Daenerys' funeral pyre and now continued in the shattered halls of Valyria. He did not know if this story had a place in the realms of men. He only knew that the flame survived here, and that in those flickering embers was the memory of the Dragon Queen who had dared to dream of a better world. Night fell once more over the silent city. The brood nestled close to Drogon, exchanging soft chirps and rumbles. A faint breeze rustled the vines that crept along the crumbling walls. Far in the distance, the ocean sighed against the blackened rocks of the shoreline. Overhead, the moon loomed in pale splendor, illuminating the ruins with a gentle, ghostly glow. And among those ruins, amid the gloom, a new legacy took shape. One born of grief, endurance, and the unquenchable flame that Daenerys Targaryen had sparked. Drogon curled around his young eyes half-lidded as he gazed into the night. Somewhere in the darkness, perhaps he sensed Daenerys' spirit watching them, or perhaps it was only the wind's whisper. In any case, the future felt less empty now. Though heartache would forever linger in the spaces she once filled, he had found a purpose in continuing her lineage. These dragons thrived. She would live on in them. If the world needed to be remade once more, they would carry the power to forge it anew. The hours passed in near silence. The hatchlings slept, their breath fluttering. Drogon remained awake, half guarding, half dreaming. His tail curled protectively around the smallest hatchling, a slender female with scales that shimmered silver in moonlight. The quiet was profound, interrupted only by distant drips of water and the occasional scuttle of a rat or other nocturnal creature. Valyria was as it had always been, a realm of secrets and nightmares, now tempered by the presence of new life. No mortal eye witnessed the scene, no poet recorded the hush. This was the domain of dragons, kept by Drogon's unwavering devotion. As dawn approached and the sky turned a faint lavender, Drogon finally closed his eyes, letting a weary sigh escape his jaws. He felt the warmth of the hatchlings nestled against him, heard the soft hum of their nascent dreams. The mosaic, chipped and broken, bore witness to the miracle that had occurred. Beyond that dome, the city's countless ruins bore testament to the cost of unchecked power. A cost Daenerys had understood too late. But here, in this fragile nest, a new chance flourished. A chance for dragons to soar again, perhaps tempered by the lessons of the past. So the night passed into morning, and with the morning came another day, another hour in a world reshaped by flame and longing. Drogon blinked awake under a soft golden light. One by one, the hatchlings stirred, yawning wide, their forked tongues flicking out to taste the air. They tested their tiny roars, proclaiming their hunger. Another day of hunting, learning, growing awaited them. Another day in which they lived, defying the cold certainty of death that had claimed their mother and so many before them. Another day in which Daenerys' spirit found a home in their beating hearts. With a stretch of his wings, Drogon rose, nudging the brood into wakefulness. They chirped excitedly, swarming around him as he lumbered toward the broken archway leading outside. The sunlight caught the mosaic, painting the dome's interior in fragmented rainbows. For a moment, Drogon paused, scanning the nest, the dais, the shards of eggshell, and the glint of cooled metal. Memory flickered across his mind, and grief twined with hope in equal measure. Then, with a final rumble of acknowledgement to the place of their birth, He stepped into the morning with his brood at his heels. Together, they would face the world, forging a future no one had anticipated. And somewhere in the hush, perhaps Daenerys Targaryen smiled. "Yeah, Hale." Drogon led his brood into the morning light, the golden rays painting each of their scales in bands of shimmering color. His own immense wings rustled in anticipation of flight, but the hatchlings, not yet strong enough to truly soar, scampered around his claws. A yawning archway opened onto a plaza choked with half-collapsed statues, vines gripping the marble like serpents, and vegetation sprouting from splits in the pavement. A faint breeze carried the smell of brine and ash from the coastline, whispering of the city's distant, volatile edges. The 5 little dragons, all eager for discovery, crowded around his feet. They made small, excited screeches as they fanned out to explore broken columns and toppled spires. Bits of loose rubble clattered beneath their claws. Drogon raised his head, scanning the skies in a habitual sweep, verifying that nothing threatened from above. Satisfied, he let his gaze drop to the brood. The largest, bronze-flecked male was already pushing the next biggest aside, trying to claim a vantage point atop a fallen statue's shoulder. The smaller, silver-scaled female chirped in protest, her throat expanding in what might have been an attempt at a roar. Drogon exhaled a short, sharp breath, and the brood froze, recognizing his authority. Bronze flicked his tail in annoyance but hopped down, leaving the vantage point for his sibling. Pleased that his warning had settled their squabble, Drogon let them resume their morning explorations. He moved along the plaza's perimeter, weaving between toppled columns, with the kind of grace only a dragon possessed, predatory, measured, heavy with power. In a far corner, beneath the remains of a half-smashed arch, a tangle of vines stirred, revealing the nest of some small reptilian creature that had slithered away upon their arrival. Drogon's nostrils flared, sampling the air. The scent of warm clay, damp foliage and rotted mortar drifted around him. No immediate danger lurked here, yet the city was never truly free of threats. The brood needed to learn caution early. One by one, the hatchlings took turns testing their wings. They climbed the marble fragments, each higher than the last, then leapt off, flapping furiously, only to land a few paces away in a burst of dust and squeals. Now and then, a swirl of wind from the harbor gave them an extra second of hang time, prompting chirrups of triumph. Drogon rumbled with approval, recalling how Daenerys had once watched him take to the skies for the first time, how the wind of freedom had carried him and his siblings far beyond the narrow horizon of the Red Waste. He tried to impart the same sense of boundless possibility to his own children, guiding them with his presence and the occasional nudge. A faint call from the largest hatchling caught his attention. Bronze had wandered close to one of the statues, where a carving of a Valyrian noble's face loomed from the rubble. The centuries had eroded the figure, but its haunting gaze remained chiseled in stone, overshadowed by serpentine designs that might once have symbolized draconic guardianship. Now the stone countenance was half buried in creepers, mouth open as though gasping. Bronze sniffed at it, then hissed. He scraped the statue with his claws, producing a harsh screech. Drogon recognized the challenge in Bronze's posture and moved closer, letting out a low growl to settle him. This statue was but a relic. It deserved neither fear nor attack. The young dragon blinked up at Drogon, relenting, and scurried back with a small hop that suggested contrition. The brood regrouped around their father, tails lashing with excitement at any small shift in the environment. Even the shifting shadows held infinite fascination. Drogon nudged them onward, toward a wide avenue leading away from the plaza. The paving stones there were cracked and uneven, forming something akin to a winding path. Along both sides rose the ruins of once grand buildings, colonnades stripped of their roofs, walls where faded mosaics still clung in scattered shards. Sunlight trickled through gaps in the overhead beams of half-collapsed structures, illuminating swirling dust motes. Somewhere far off, water dripped in a slow, steady rhythm, hinting at hidden canals or underground reservoirs. They passed a cluster of broken pillars that once framed a temple facade. The design featured stylized dragons carved into the stone, their sinuous bodies wrapping around columns that had long since crumbled. The hatchling sniffed at these remnants, biting curiously at the edges. A faint shimmer of old paint remained, faint purples and golds, now dulled by centuries of exposure. Drogon paused here, letting the brood roam. This place was quiet, almost too quiet, but safe enough under his watchful glare. He sensed no immediate threat beyond the usual lurking shadows. A sudden scuttle near the far side of the temple caught the smallest female's attention. She jerked her head up, silver eyes wide, and bounded forward with surprising speed, claws clicking on stone. The movement had come from a half-fallen colossus that blocked part of the thoroughfare, a giant statue with broken arms, lying in two pieces. As the silver hatchling approached, a creature squealed and darted away. A rat the size of a cat, mutated or simply well-fed on the city's hidden bounty. The hatchling gave chase, stumbling over debris in her enthusiasm. She let out an indignant squeak as the rat slipped into a crevice. Seeing her frustration, Drogon moved closer, and the other hatchlings followed, huddling around their siblings' find. They sniffed the crack in the stone, tongues flicking. The rat was gone, but the promise of a chase had sparked their predatory instincts. Drogon observed their excitement with measured amusement. He recalled, with a pang of longing, how Daenerys had once laughed at Rhaegal and Viserion tussling over a scrap of meat. The memory glowed in his mind for a moment, then dimmed, replaced by the present reality of his own brood living among these haunted columns. Somewhere above, clouds drifted across the sun, casting the avenue into brief shadow. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the hatchlings chirped uneasily, scanning the sky. Drogon extended a wing, letting them gather beneath its shelter. He felt them press against his flank, seeking warmth. Each day taught them that old Valyria, with its unpredictable weather and lingering curses, offered no gentle domain. Survival here demanded vigilance. He continued down the avenue, the hatchlings in tow. The city opened into a wide courtyard, ringed by towering columns that had somehow resisted collapse. Their upper halves were decorated with intricate carvings of interlaced dragons, breathing stylized flames, the design so elaborate it was a wonder it had survived the centuries. At the center of the courtyard stood a circular platform, presumably once used for ceremonies or public gatherings. Now its floor was cracked, and a half-submerged mosaic of a giant dragon's head stared upward, its eyes formed by shards of polished obsidian. Water had pooled around the platform's edge, alive with moss and scuttling insects. The hatchlings fanned out to the platform, sniffing at the water's surface, batting at the startled insects. The silver female ventured a bit too close, slipping on wet stone. She landed with a splash, spraying droplets across her siblings. Instantly, they hissed in alarm and hopped away. But curiosity soon replaced wariness, and one of them, a green-tinged male, waded in after her, testing his claws against the shallow water. Bronze circled the perimeter, flicking his tail and snorting, as if determining whether the watery ring posed any risk. Drogon stood on the outskirts, scanning the perimeter for lurking threats. The presence of water would certainly draw other creatures, eventually. A dull hum of old magic pulsed in this courtyard, stirring something in Drogon's chest that felt like a half-formed memory. Perhaps it was the mosaic beneath the surface, or the overarching columns etched with Valyrian runes that once channeled draconic power. The hatchlings seemed only vaguely aware of this energy, their attention drawn more to the physical discoveries before them. With each day, though, they would learn the undercurrents of this place, how the entire city thrummed with ancient spells and the echoes of the doom. Content that they were safe, Drogon lowered his body onto a relatively flat slab of stone, letting his tail hang off the edge. He watched as the brood explored, diving under the water's surface for the small fish that darted in panicked schools. Their attempts to snap at the quicksilver shapes were clumsy and seldom rewarded. Still, they persisted, driven by the thrill of the hunt. It was not unlike how he, Rhaegal, and Viserion had tested their wings in the shimmering seas near Astapor all those years ago. He could almost taste the memory of salt and newness, the swirl of the wind, as he discovered the joy of independence. Yet no matter how strong that recollection, it was always tinged with the agony of recent events. He remembered how Daenerys' voice had thrilled at the sight of her dragons gliding free above Slaver's Bay. Then came the heartbreak of King's Landing, the final betrayal, and her lifeless body beneath his claws. The pain would never fully vanish. But here was a different chapter unfolding, one that might ease the sting of the past by giving him a future to protect. After a time, the silver female chirped and emerged from the water, shaking droplets from her wings. She hopped around the edge of the platform, tail high, as though in triumph. The green-tinged male followed, splashing onto dry land. Both of them scuttled toward Drogon, making plaintive noises that signaled hunger or perhaps discomfort from the chilly water. Drogon lowered his snout and exhaled a warm gust, drying them. The other three quickly joined, crowding around for heat. He obliged, letting a faint tendril of fire flicker from his jaws. The brood squealed in delight, pressing closer. After they were warmed, he nudged them forward, urging them toward the courtyard's western edge, where a wide thoroughfare cut deeper into the city. Massive structures loomed ahead, including what looked like the remnants of an amphitheater. Half the colonnade had collapsed into a tangle of pillars, but rows of seats still spiraled downward, forming a kind of crater where wild vegetation thrived. The once smooth steps were cracked and pitted, and creepers dangled from the upper tiers. The structure's center remained a hollow stage, littered with broken sculptures. Drogon advanced carefully, ears attuned to any sign of lurking predators. He sensed the faint scuttling of creatures among the seats, a swarm of small reptiles or rodents. Good hunting practice for the brood, so long as nothing larger lay in wait. The hatchlings spread out, bounding into the amphitheater with an exuberance that made Drogon tense. He soared onto the upper rim, perching on a fractured ledge that overlooked the entire venue. From there, he could keep watch while the young ones explored below. Their squeals and hisses echoed across the seats as they scampered after the scampering life forms that darted between cracks. Now and again, one of them would pounce, jaws snapping around a squeaking rodent or reptile. A fleeting shriek, then silence. Though the hatchlings still relied mostly on what Drogon provided, their instincts for hunting were strong. Bronze soared from one row to the next in short glides, chasing anything that moved. The rest followed, each trying to prove their prowess. Drogon let them roam, intervening only with a cautionary roar if they ventured too far from view. He surveyed the amphitheater's heights, scanning the horizon of ruined towers beyond. Sunlight glinted off blackened spires in the distance. A faint haze of smoke drifted from some crack in the earth, revealing volcanic vents. Old Valyria was a land forever simmering, reminding its inhabitants that the doomed scars still bled fire underground. The notion made Drogon uneasy. He remembered the night of storms, the dais cracking beneath his flames, the ancient currents of power that still lingered. He wondered if the brood's presence might awaken more of that magic. It was an unanswerable question, one that gnawed at his draconic mind whenever he gazed upon the city's stark silhouette. A shriek from below snapped his attention downward. The silver female had cornered a particularly large rodent, but the creature snapped back with razor teeth. She leapt away, battered her wings and hissed, tail lashing. Her siblings came running, crowding around in excitement. Bronze reared up, letting out a piercing cry. Before the rodent could flee, Bronze unleashed a pitiful flicker of flame, not much more than a spark. Yet it was enough to startle the prey. The unfortunate creature turned to bolt, but the green-tinged male lunged, jaws closing around its back. The rodent let out a final squeal and fell limp. The young ones bristled with triumph, though they quickly lost interest in sharing the kill. Bronze and Green began a tug-of-war, squeaking and snapping at each other's snouts, each determined to claim the prize. The smaller female paced around them, chirping irritably, wanting her share. Drogon lowered his head and roared, the sound echoing across the amphitheater. At once the brood froze. He hopped down from his vantage point, landing heavily on the crumbling seats in a shower of dust. With deliberate steps, he advanced on them, flaring his wings. His presence reminded them of rank and order. The brood parted, lowering their heads, and he snatched the carcass, tearing it into smaller pieces. He let each hatchling have a share, ensuring no single one gorged themselves while the others starved. They devoured the morsels, snapping and licking their jaws, enthralled by the taste of fresh prey. Drogon observed their feeding with a sense of satisfaction. They were learning to hunt on their own, to share in the city's meager resources. He rumbled softly, urging them onward. The day was growing hotter, the sun now high above, its rays beating down on the ancient stones. The brood would soon tire in this exposed place. Perhaps they should return to the cooler passages beneath the dome, where the dais and nest offered some comfort. But before he led them back, he sensed something stirring beneath the broken amphitheater stage. A faint rustle, a gentle tremor. He froze, scanning the shadows. The hatchlings felt it too, for they huddled closer, squeaking in uncertainty. At first, only silence answered. Then a low hiss drifted up, a sound that vibrated with an otherworldly resonance. Drogon crouched, preparing for a threat. His tail flicked in warning. The hatchlings gathered around him. A shape emerged from the darkness. A scaled creature, wide and serpentine, with a ridge of spines along its back. It was larger than any rodent, though not nearly as big as Drogon. Its opalescent scales caught the sunlight, gleaming with a sickly greenish hue. Two milky eyes were set in a wedge-shaped head. It hissed again, coiling its body in challenge. Perhaps some ancient species of basilisk or wyvern that had adapted to these ruins. Drogon's nostrils flared in answer. He let out a chest-rattling roar, and the hatchlings echoed him, though their cries were higher-pitched, less menacing. The serpentine creature recoiled, flattening itself against the broken stage, as if trying to gauge the dragon's intentions. It did not flee, but neither did it attack outright. In the hush, Drogon inhaled, releasing a measured gout of flame that scorched the rubble inches away from the beast's coiled tail. The heat made it shriek. Instantly, it whirled and slithered back into the shadows, body rasping against stone until it vanished. Drogon waited, flames licking at the corners of his mouth, but the creature did not reappear. The hatchlings bristled, scanning the darkness, uncertain. At length, Drogon relaxed, realizing the beast had fled. He hopped off the stage and led his brood away from the amphitheater, casting one last glare over his shoulder to warn anything else lurking there. The city offered countless hiding places for such creatures, many mutated or twisted by the Doom's legacy. He would need to remain ever vigilant. At least the brood had learned a lesson. They were not alone, nor always the apex in these twisting catacombs. Some foes would be smaller and faster, others might be cunning or venomous. As they traversed back toward their dome, the heat of midday pressed down upon old Valyria like a smothering blanket. The hatchlings panted, small tongues lolling from their jaws, wings drooping at their sides. Drogon guided them along narrower passages where collapsed towers offered shade. The path twisted between blackened walls overgrown with creepers, the tendrils drooping like a curtain that parted when the dragons brushed past. At intervals, they paused to rest, and Drogon warded off the heat by fanning them with his wings or exhaling brief clouds of cooled breath. Dragonfire could be harnessed in many ways. A careful exhalation drawn from the air in his lungs could emerge as hot or only moderately warm. It was never truly cold, but it helped. Eventually, the brood found a sheltered alley where a trickle of water flowed from an old aqueduct. It pooled in a corner, forming a shallow basin. Eager for relief, the hatchlings scampered forward to drink. They lapped at the water, ignoring its slightly brackish taste. One or two even lay down in the shallow pool, letting the trickle rinse the dust and grime from their scales. Drogon stood guard, scanning the rooftops for any sign of winged predators. A gloom of partial ruins enclosed the alley. Broken statuary cast jagged silhouettes, and thick vines hung overhead like natural drapes. Though any man who once walked these streets would have found the sight ominous, Drogon felt only a solemn kinship with the land. Its scars mirrored his own. When the brood had quenched their thirst, he nudged them on. Each step closer to their dome, he reflected on the many hidden pockets of the city he had yet to explore. Long columns rose from watery canals in the distance. Half-submerged passageways beckoned from beneath shattered arches, and entire towers tilted precariously over the ghostly haze that drifted from volcanic vents. If once this place had been the pinnacle of civilization, it was now a realm where nature and magic clashed in unbridled chaos. Yet here, His hatchlings lived and thrived, forging a new chapter in draconic history. They reached the dome in the late afternoon, the sky tinged with the promise of evening. The mosaic floor greeted them, chipped and scorched, marked forever by the miraculous birth of the brood. The dais stood at the back, cracked and cooled, but still etched with lines of ancient metal. Bits of eggshell remained scattered in a rough circle. The hatchlings made soft noises, perhaps a sense of recognition or belonging. Drogon guided them to a corner where he kept remnants of fresh kills. They tore into the scraps, feeding to replenish the energy spent on their explorations. While they ate, Drogon rested. He curled his body around the perimeter of the nest, letting out a low, rumbling sigh. His limbs ached from hours of vigilance, from the tension of patrolling a city rife with hidden dangers. Yet a deep satisfaction lingered. Each day, the brood grew stronger, more confident, more adept at survival. In time, they would master these ruins, shaping old Valyria into a place of living fire once again. As dusk approached, the sky turned a heavy purple. Shadows deepened in the dome's recesses. The brood, sated from their meal, engaged in bouts of play, half-hearted wrestling matches, snaps of the jaws, small bursts of flame. From his vantage point, Drogon watched them tumble over each other, squeaking and rolling across the floor. Whenever a scuffle grew too intense, he issued a warning growl. They corrected themselves, mindful of his formidable presence. A memory drifted into his mind. Daenerys standing tall in a wide courtyard, watching her 3 dragons spar in the warm light of Meereen. He remembered how she would clap her hands and laugh when they pounced on each other, only to separate at her gentle command. The memory was so vivid he could almost hear the echo of her voice. He blinked, releasing a quiet rumble in his throat that made the hatchlings pause, heads tilted in question. He wanted to tell them of her, but words were the domain of mortals. All he could share were these tremors of longing, the intangible sorrow that shrouded his roaring heart. Night descended fully, and the brood settled into a pile around Drogon's flank. Their breathing slowed, small chests rising and falling in a lullaby of life. The biggest male's tail draped over the silver female, while the green-tinged sibling rested his head on Bronze's side. 2 others lay near Drogon's hind leg, half dozing, wings twitching with the final pulses of the day's adrenaline. Drogon could feel their collective warmth, a living tapestry woven from the threads of survival and continuity. It eased the raw ache that haunted him. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness wash over him. The dome stood silent, broken only by the soft drip of moisture from cracks in the archways and the occasional rustle of vines. Far off, thunder grumbled. Storms were common here. Perhaps by dawn the air would crackle with electricity, and the sky would open in a torrent of rain. For now, peace reigned. Drogon listened to the brood's breath, each exhale a testament to life's resilience. If Daenerys' spirit roamed these ancient halls, perhaps she found solace, too, in the hush of slumbering dragons. He drifted in a half-sleep, mind wandering into dreamscapes of memory and possibility. Scenes of flight over endless seas, triumphant hunts in the sky, a queen's soft hand stroking his scales. Then came the horror of kings landing in flames, the clang of swords and the stench of burning flesh. He saw the moment of betrayal replayed, the flash of steel, the shock in Daenerys' eyes, her body collapsing. He roared in his sleep, a sound that resonated through the dome, jostling the brood awake. They stirred, anxious, pressing closer to him. The wave of their small forms comforted him enough to quell the nightmare. His roar subsided into a low rumble, and they drifted back to their rest. Midnight found the dome lit by a faint glow from the moon, seeping through fractures in the ceiling. Drogon heard an odd rustling. He raised his head, eyes searching the darkness. One corner of the dome seemed to shimmer. A trick of the moonlight. Or had the dais, dormant since the night of the storm, awoken again? He inhaled, tasting the air for hints of sorcery. A tang of old magic lingered, but nothing stirred beyond the swirl of shadows. Perhaps the illusions of Valyria played tricks on him. He rumbled, dismissing it. The city was full of half-spirits, remnants of power that flickered in and out of existence without reason. Even so, he kept a cautious vigil for a time before allowing himself to rest. When dawn broke, it came in a burst of ruddy light that painted the city's ruins in hues of ember and gold. Drogon rose and led the hatchlings outside, letting them greet the new day. Over the next hours, they practiced short flights, bounding from one crumbling turret to another. A couple of them tumbled, wings failing to catch the air in time, but no serious injuries resulted. Drogon used these moments as teaching points, scolding them with deep growls, or encouraging them with soft rumbles when they succeeded. By midday, they were thoroughly exhausted, panting in the shade of a leaning tower that threatened to topple at any moment. Gathered beneath that precarious spire, the brood caught their breath and dozed while Drogon watched over them. His thoughts wandered. Though the city offered abundant ruin for them to explore, he sometimes wondered if one day they would outgrow this domain. Dragons were not meant to remain hidden away forever. Once, Daenerys had unleashed her brood upon the world, forging alliances and toppling tyrants. Her ambition had soared as high as any dragon's flight. Yet it had ended in tragedy, overshadowing the brilliance of her victories. Drogon sensed that these hatchlings too might someday roam beyond the stony confines of Valyria. But not yet, not while they were so vulnerable. For now, they remained a secret kept by these cursed walls. In the days that followed, he guided them further afield. They glimpsed twisted forests of petrified trees in the outskirts, where the ground split into steaming fissures. The air smelled of sulfur, and eerie vapors shimmered above the fissures like phantom flames. The hatchlings trotted carefully around the cracks, testing each foothold. Occasionally, Drogon soared overhead, scanning for potential hazards. He saw ghostly forms flitting at the edges of vision, mists or illusions conjured by lingering magic. The brood seemed to sense these presences, letting out uneasy chirps whenever the illusions drifted too close. Sometimes in the heat of midday, Drogon took them to the city's remnants of canal systems. Strange aquatic creatures lurked there, blind fish with pale scales, large amphibians that croaked in the gloom, reptilian beasts that nested in half-submerged crypts. The young dragons reveled in these hunts, though Drogon intervened if anything threatened to injure them. Each close call served as a lesson. Before long, the brood gained confidence in the watery labyrinth, pouncing on prey with sharpened reflexes. In the evenings, they collapsed beside him in the dome, their bellies full, their limbs trembling with exhaustion. He welcomed these moments of calm, content to let them heal and grow in the safety of his presence. One night, thunderheads drifted overhead, black and swirling with promise. Flickers of lightning illuminated the city in harsh white bursts, revealing the labyrinthine spires and arches that marked Valyria's skyline. The brood huddled in the dome, anxious but curious. Drogon paced at the entrance, lifting his head to watch the spectacle. A memory of that stormy night months ago, when he had breathed fire on the dais, stirred in him. He felt the static electricity prickling his scales, each hairline sense attuned to the raging skies. Lightning cracked, hitting a far-off tower. A thunderous rumble followed, shivering the city's bones. The hatchlings recoiled, squeaking. He returned to them, pressing his flank against their small bodies, letting them feel the steady drum of his heartbeat. Slowly, the fear ebbed from their eyes, replaced by awe. Storms here were fierce and unpredictable, but so was dragonfire. Perhaps in time, they would learn to harness that fear, to see themselves as part of the same elemental tapestry. For now, they merely watched the lightning with wide eyes, as though it were a dragon's roar in the sky. When the storm finally broke, rain pummeled the dome in torrential sheets, seeping through cracks. Water dripped onto the mosaic floor, pooling around the dais. The hatchlings pressed close, tails curling around their own feet to keep dry. Drogon extended his wings overhead, forming a kind of scaly canopy. The thunder bellowed again, closer this time, and a jagged bolt flashed through the dome's gaping ceiling. It struck the dais in a crackling burst, sending shards of stone and sparks of molten metal flying. The brood shrieked. Drogon leapt forward, fanning the air with massive wings, scattering debris. When the light subsided, he saw that the dais had cracked further, a fresh fracture slicing through the ancient ruins. Steam rose where rainwater hissed against molten edges. Drogon smelled a hint of ozone, that tang of lightning's aftermath. His heart pounded. He remembered the day he had tried to stoke the dais with his fire, recalling how the metal inlay had glowed. This time, lightning had done the work, and the dais flickered with an afterimage of energy. The hatchlings cowered behind him, whimpering, too frightened to investigate. Drogon advanced cautiously, sniffing at the jagged fissure. Beneath the shattered stone, he thought he saw a glimmer, a swirl of silver, or perhaps a shard of crystallized essence. Then it faded, leaving only scorched rubble in its place. He let out a frustrated growl, stepping back. Whatever power the dais had once contained now seemed irreparably broken. Another relic lost to the unstoppable passage of time. The hatchlings approached in wide arcs, snuffling at the burning edges. Bronze hissed when the heat singed his nose. Drogon nudged them away, stifling any further curiosity. If the dais still held hidden magic, it was best left untouched. They had enough to contend with in old Valyria, without awakening forces they did not understand. The storm raged well into the night, drenching the land and swelling the canals. Water dripped endlessly into the dome's interior, forming puddles that reflected the flicker of sporadic lightning. The hatchlings dozed in fitful bursts, always roused by the next clap of thunder. Drogon stood guard, occasionally unleashing a small flame to warm the air and reassure them. His mind flickered between thoughts of Daenerys' final breath and the miracle of new life that had emerged in these ruins. Outside, the storm battered stone and metal, forging a symphony of chaos that seemed to echo Valyria's ancient downfall. Morning arrived in damp stillness. The clouds withdrew, leaving the city shrouded in a haze of mist that curled along the streets and gathered in hollows of rubble. Droplets clung to every surface, glinting in the weak sunlight. The dais was blackened with scorch marks, steam still rising from the cracks. Drogon's body ached from a night of tension, but the brood seemed rested enough once the thunder had subsided. They meandered around the dome, stepping gingerly over puddles, gazing at the fresh damage. The dais no longer glowed or thrummed with hidden energy. It lay inert, a final casualty of the storm. Seeking fresh air, Drogon led them out into the city to see what the deluge had wrought. Many streets were awash, their debris-littered surfaces slick with mud and runoff. The canals ran high with water that poured from cracks in the walls. Strange fish, possibly washed in from the sea, flopped among the rubble. The brood eagerly chased these stranded creatures, snapping them up in tiny bursts of flame and glee. Overhead, the sky brightened, revealing the battered outlines of towers that had lost more stones in the storm. Bird-like creatures, black-feathered and large, glided across the drab sky. They kept their distance, wary of the dragons below. Day progressed quietly. Water drained away, leaving behind a fresh sheen of mud and algae. Drogon found a broken walkway that led to higher ground, and from there, he surveyed the city's battered sprawl. The brood huddled around him, wings rustling, gazing upon the steaming fissures in the distance, and the collapsed spires closer at hand. For all its dangers, old Valyria was a place of stark grandeur. A cradle of power long spent, still haunted by the arrogance that had once raised dragons to the pinnacle of empire. To Drogon, it was a vast graveyard, but also a sanctuary, free of the politics and betrayals of men, a place where dragons could be dragons. The brood was growing daily, their bodies lengthening, wings becoming more defined. Though they had a long journey to reach adult size, the changes were undeniable. Their appetite for exploration and hunting had grown too, and Drogon found himself guiding them farther from the dome each day, showing them new corners of the city. At times, they encountered mutated beasts or half-wild predators that lurked in sunken courtyards. Sometimes, hunts were thrilling successes. Sometimes the brood fled from larger threats. Each experience forged them stronger, teaching them the cunning and ferocity they would need to survive. Still, nights brought the keenest reflection of what had been lost. Drogon would rest with them in the dome, listening to their soft breathing, and recall Daenerys' unwavering determination, her unwavering love for her dragons, and her dream of a better world. Often he felt a pang of guilt that he could not continue that dream in the realms of men. Yet he clung to the notion that keeping these hatchlings alive and strong was its own form of devotion. Somewhere, the memory of Daenerys might find peace in seeing dragons thrive again. Seasons shifted subtly in Valyria. The storms grew less frequent, replaced by a dry heat that intensified day by day. Vines shriveled in the sun, water sources receded, and the brood learned to search for sustenance in more distant places. Their wings, once only strong enough for short glides, began to bear them across wider spans. Drogon watched with paternal pride as they soared from one ruined tower to the next, squealing in excitement. Each day they improved, until one afternoon, the largest male attempted a genuine flight. He leapt from a vantage point high on a crumbled rampart, wings flaring wide, and caught the updraft over a canyon-like street. He glided dozens of yards before landing in a billow of dust, triumphant. The rest quickly attempted similar feats, each success fueling the next. With the brood more mobile, Drogon found it easier to hunt alongside them. He led them to the outskirts, where petrified groves stood, warning them off any sinkholes or unstable ground. He demonstrated aerial ambushes, diving onto large prey, a scaly reptile or a mutated boar that wandered too close to the city. The hatchlings circled overhead, screeching in support, occasionally dropping onto the prey's flanks. Their teamwork improved with every hunt, forging bonds of survival that mirrored what Drogon had once shared with his siblings. Yet, underlying it all was the knowledge that these young dragons, one day, would seek independence. They would test each other in challenges of dominance, and eventually they might scatter across the world, each forging its own path. For now, they remained a tight-knit group, content to roost in the dome each night with their father. Often they would curl together, wings folded, tails intertwined, forming a living wreath of scales and claws. Drogon sometimes woke in the small hours before dawn, hearing them murmur in sleep. He recalled how, not so long ago, they had been mere eggs, lifeless husks hidden beneath the city's rubble. Their hatching was a testament to the resilience of dragonkind, a living echo of the moment he and his siblings first broke their shells in the shadow of Daenerys' funeral pyre. Days stretched into weeks, then months. The brood's wings grew broader, their bodies muscled from frequent flight and hunts. The silver female, once the smallest, had developed a sleek agility in the air, outmaneuvering her siblings during playful chases. The green-tinged male favored stealth, gliding close to rooftops before ambushing unsuspecting prey. Bronze remained the largest, with a commanding roar that rattled the windows of half-standing towers. They all bore the mark of Drogon's lineage. Sturdy frames, fiery temperaments, cunning eyes that reflected the intelligence of dragons from ages past. As the sun set on a particularly hot day, the brood lounged atop a weathered parapet, gazing out over a molten horizon. Drogon spread his wings, letting the last warmth of the sun soak into his scales. The hatchlings watched him, chirping softly. One by one, they mimicked his posture, wings outstretched to capture the rays. The silhouette they cast upon the city's broken silhouette was a portrait of renewal. 6 dragons, great and small, perched in the heart of a fallen empire, each carrying forward the legacy of fire and blood. He recalled Daenerys' final flight on his back, how she had looked upon the world with an almost sorrowful determination. He would never forget her, nor the tears he shed when her heart ceased to beat. But as he watched the brood pivot their heads to watch the sunset, he felt a gentler wave of emotion, a mingling of loss and gratitude. Her dream had not died. Dragons lived, still free, still forging their place under the same sun. No iron throne could contain that spirit. No betrayal could fully extinguish it. The brood was proof enough. Night descended again, and they returned to the dome. It felt like home now, a place of safety amid the city's perpetual ruin. The mosaic floor was cracked by the storms, the dais further fractured, but that hardly mattered. The brood claimed sleeping spots across scattered piles of rubble, or in alcoves Drogon had cleared, each nest lined with soft plant matter they'd gathered. Flickers of moonlight shone through the broken ceiling, illuminating the shapes of sleeping dragons. Drogon settled among them, his mind wandering to the future. The brood would soon be large enough to test longer flights. Maybe they would circle the entire peninsula, gaze upon the smoking seas that surrounded it. Perhaps they would see from afar the continents that Daenerys once walked, the lands she sought to liberate. He did not know if they would ever go there. But the simple possibility spurred an odd sense of hope in him. So long as dragons existed, the world's story remained open-ended. He closed his eyes, letting the lullaby of their combined breathing carry him. The city breathed with them, or so it seemed. Broken but not voiceless, the ancient stones hummed with the dreams of a once mighty empire. And in that hush, Drogon felt Daenerys' presence, like a wisp of warmth carried on the air. If she lingered, it was as a guardian spirit, watching over the brood's growth, ensuring that the dawn of dragons was not their twilight. Even if that was only an illusion conjured by longing, it was enough to fill the night with a calm acceptance. So the hours slipped by, the darkness unbroken, but for the stars and an occasional glimmer from a distant volcanic vent. Dawn would come again, heralding new lessons, new hunts, new flights. The brood would grow, day by day, forging an uncharted future in the land of ghosts and shadows. Drogon's final waking thought was of those eggs, once petrified in gloom, now living, breathing flames that might one day set the sky ablaze. And in their throats, in every spark of fire, resided the echo of Daenerys Targaryen's dream, a dream that had begun in flames and would endure so long as dragons soared above the world. Ika. By the time the next morning settled its pale light across the broken dome, the brood stirred with a restless eagerness. Night's lull had not diminished their energy. If anything, they woke more driven to explore. They snapped at the stray insects hovering in damp corners and let out a series of chirps, summoning Drogon to lead them into the day's mysteries. The largest male, Bronze, tested his wings by vaulting onto a broken column, where he greeted his siblings with a triumphant cry. The silver female flicked her tail in playful challenge, as though daring him to fly farther than before. The others circled beneath, squeaking in anticipation. Drogon rose from his slumber, shaking off a layer of dust. Every joint felt the strain of sheltering them through the stormy season. A quick breath of flame cleared the sticky cobwebs from the dome's entrance, scattering startled beetles and sending them scurrying into the fissures of rubble. The brood hopped forward to snap at the escapees, a brief amuse-bouche before real hunting began. Drogon observed their coordination. They had learned to move as one, or at least as a loose pack, each complementing the other. They were still young and prone to small squabbles, but they possessed a budding discipline that filled him with a sense of paternal pride. He nudged them outside, letting them see the morning sun lift over old Valyria's shattered skyline. The storm had cleansed the air somewhat, carrying away some of the sulphurous haze that usually clung to the city's edges. In the distance, the once imposing towers and spires seemed less foreboding in the early light. Fog clung in wispy tendrils to the canals, and somewhere below, water dripped rhythmically as it seeped through cracks in subterranean chambers. The brood peered at the sight, chirping among themselves, as though conferring on which direction they wished to take. Drogon sensed their excitement. He stretched his wings, catching the breeze, and let out a roar that rolled across the toppled columns, a proclamation that the dragons were awake and on the move. The brood's response was immediate. They bounded ahead, weaving through the tangle of debris that littered the path beyond the dome. Eager to test flight, Bronze launched himself from a fallen archway, managing a few sustained flaps before landing heavily on a chunk of fractured masonry. The green-tinged male followed, misjudging the wind and half collapsing onto an upturned slab. The silver female tried a different approach, jumping from a higher ledge and letting the thermals carry her in a graceful arc before landing a short distance away. She lifted her head, triumphant. Drogon rumbled encouragement, then ascended in a powerful leap, shadow flowing across the courtyard as he took to the sky. The brood squealed happily, scattering to follow along the ground, gliding in brief spurts, while casting wary glances upward to track him. He led them across rooftops that had been fused into strange angles by the dune's fires. Broken terraces and parapets jutted like fangs, forming a jagged skyline. Vines thick as a man's arm clung to walls, glistening with morning dew. The brood alternated between trotting along these makeshift bridges and taking short flights from one level to the next. Periodically, Drogon circled back to ensure they followed without incident. He recognized the lumps of collapsed structures where they had once explored. With each revisit, the brood seemed more confident, testing how far they could leap or how long they could glide without losing altitude. Their wings, once small and frail, now bore them across longer gaps, signs that they were growing into their heritage. When they reached an expansive courtyard where giant, petrified trees rose from the cracked ground, Drogon landed atop a half-toppled obelisk. His claws scraped stone as he folded his wings, scanning the environment. The brood spread out at the perimeter, tails lashing. This courtyard was quieter than most. No trickling water or skittering beasts broke the hush. Only the wind stirred the desiccated leaves that clung to the fossilized branches overhead. A smell of sulfur lingered, hinting at volcanic vents beneath the surface. Drogon remained on alert, senses straining for movement beyond the petrified grove. He knew that pockets of dangerous creatures often lurked near these silent stands of ancient timber. As if in answer, a low hiss drifted from the far side of the clearing. The brood froze, head snapping toward the sound. Silver crept forward, crouched low, each claw digging into the dust. Bronze followed, shoulders tense, wings half-fanned in readiness. The green-tinged male hissed in warning, and the other two siblings, each with distinct dark coloration banded with hints of gold or copper, formed a circle around the spot of interest. A cluster of stone-like trunks blocked Drogon's line of sight, so he unfurled his wings in one powerful beat, lifted into the air, and glided to a vantage point atop another broken spire. From there, he peered into the clearing. Near a shattered stump of wood that had turned to stone, something elongated and dark slithered into the open. It moved slowly, like a snake, but it had the glimmer of plated scales along its back and a ridge of quills framing its neck. One milky eye swiveled toward the brood, and it opened its mouth in a rattling hiss. Drogon recognized it as a mutated serpent lizard, one of the subterranean species that occasionally surfaced to hunt unwary prey. They were not typically large enough to threaten a full-grown dragon, but they could be deadly to smaller creatures, especially if venomous. The brood, still small in comparison to Drogon, confronted this slithering foe with uncertain courage. Bronze roared, a sharp, high sound that echoed among the fossilized trees. Silver darted to one side, drawing the serpent's focus. The green-tinged male circled behind, tail swishing. The serpent lizard lashed its head from side to side, spitting as if attempting to ward them off. Its quills bristled, forming a halo of sharp spikes around its throat. The brood advanced in halting steps, each hiss and squeal a concerted challenge. Drogon held his position in the air, watching to see how they would handle the threat. His instincts told him to protect them, but another part of him knew they needed to learn to fight on their own. If they intended to live in this land of nightmares, they had to master its perils. Bronze took the initiative, spewing a modest burst of flame at the serpent's flank. It wriggled in pain, letting out a harsh cry as the fire singed its scales. With surprising speed, it recoiled and spat a dark fluid from between its fangs. Bronze dodged sideways, but a few droplets struck the ground, sizzling against the cracked earth in a fume of noxious steam. The brood hissed in alarm. Silver launched herself at the creature's tail, jaws snapping. She bit down, leaving shallow punctures, then leapt away before the serpent could whip around. The green-tinged male followed her lead, darting in from the opposite side, claws raking the creature's flanks. The serpent lizard convulsed, battered by these sudden attacks. It spat more of its corrosive fluid, forcing Silver to take a wider arc. Bronze roared again, letting out a deeper column of flame which momentarily engulfed the serpent's upper body. When the flames receded, a foul stench filled the courtyard. Smoke rose from charred scales, and the creature's hissing turned frantic. In a last desperate strike, it lunged at the nearest hatchling, which happened to be the copper-banded sibling. That small dragon barely managed to scramble aside, escaping the snapping jaws by a hair's breadth. From his perch, Drogon watched with tension coiling his every muscle. If one of the brood was wounded, he would intervene. Yet, they fought in unison, cunning and quick. The serpent lizard, beset from multiple angles, had no way to defend against all the swirling forms. Bronze's jaws latched onto its neck, flame licking from his nostrils. The serpent bucked, but then the green-tinged male clamped onto its flank while Silver rushed in from the front. The copper-banded sibling and the last of the brood closed ranks, snapping at the creature's sides. Hemmed in by scorching teeth, the serpent's final hiss turned into a choked rattle before it slumped. Body smoking, they pulled away, spitting bits of scorched flesh. The serpent lizard's tail thrashed once, then lay still. The brood hopped back, eyes wide and sides heaving with adrenaline. Drogon released a powerful roar of approval, swooping down from his vantage to inspect the kill. Steam rose from the serpent's scales, and the rancid odor of burnt venom made the brood sneeze in disgust. Yet each hatchling held its head high, proud to have confronted a threat without their father's direct intervention. Drogon circled the remains, exhaling a controlled flame to cauterize any venom that might be seeping from the carcass. He nudged the body with a clawed forelimb, confirming it was no longer a threat. The brood gathered around, surveying the spoils of victory. Bronze preened, puffing out his chest. Silver flicked her tail in excitement, hopping side to side. The others hissed and nipped at the serpent lizard's limp limbs, curious if it might be worth devouring. Most of the flesh was scorched beyond salvage, and the sour reek of venom still clung to it, so they lost interest quickly. Drogon, satisfied with their performance, let out a low rumble, his way of praising them and urging them on. They had proven their worth in battle. His heart pounded with pride. They left the carcass for the scavengers that would creep from the deeper tunnels by night. The brood, invigorated by the victory, followed Drogon deeper into the courtyard, weaving around the petrified trunks. By midday the sun had climbed high, bathing the area in a harsh glow that made the ground shimmer. Heat radiated from black stones. The brood's tongues lolled, and the atmosphere grew stifling. Drogon judged it wise to seek water. With a quick rustle of wings, he beckoned them to follow, lifting into a gliding arc that angled toward the faint roar of a canal. They scampered below, guided by his silhouette crossing the spires. Eventually, the sound of rushing water grew stronger. They reached a segment of the city where a large canal remained intact, fed by an underground spring that poured from a carved lion's mouth. Its waters cascaded into a broad channel that wound through the debris, glinting in the sun. Algae and reeds clung to the edges. Valyria's architecture rose in broken columns on either side, forming a canyon-like corridor. Drogon descended onto a ledge near the water's edge. The brood emerged from behind a cluster of ruined arches, squeaking with relief at the sight of flowing water. They bounded forward, dipping their muzzles and greedily lapping at the cool stream. Drogon kept watch, knowing that predators often hunted near these canals. Several times, he had encountered half-blind eels or amphibious lizards that lunged from the water, jaws brimming with jagged teeth. Today, though, the water's surface was placid, broken only by the ripples the dragons caused as they drank. The brood splashed, guzzling down mouthfuls, some even stumbling into deeper patches. Their flapping wings kept them afloat until they scrambled back onto the stone ledge. In the hush that followed, a pleasant lull settled over them. The courtyard of the serpent-lizard battle felt distant, overshadowed by the calm of running water. After they quenched their thirst, Drogon led them along the canal's bank, where scraps of old mosaic still clung to the walls. Images of dragons soared amid swirling clouds of color, an echo of Valyria's heyday. Cracks marred the artwork, and creeping vines had dislodged pieces. The brood sniffed at the mosaic, occasionally tugging loose a fragment that fell into the water with a splash. Drogon ambled behind them, letting them wander. The path curved around a half-submerged plaza, where steps led into the canal, as though it had once been a grand promenade for boats or water processions. Now it was a home for strange waterfowl with elongated necks and dull feathers. The brood startled a few from the reeds, sending them flapping across the water in a burst of squawks. A sense of tranquility settled over the group, The midday sun, now overhead, made them drowsy. One by one they found shady recesses amid the collapsed colonnades to rest. Bronn stretched out on a ledge, half in the sun, half in the shade, letting the heat soak his dark scales. Silver curled on a chunk of marble, eyes half closed, mouth parted slightly. The green-tinged male nested in a hollow beneath a broken pillar, while the other two siblings sprawled together, tails intertwined. Drogon perched nearby, watchful. He flared his nostrils, sampling the air for threats. Satisfied it was safe enough, he allowed himself a moment of respite, tucking his wings in a relaxed angle. Their lull did not last long. A faint sound, distant yet distinct, caught Drogon's attention. A rhythmic clink, like metal on stone. He rose slowly, membrane sliding across his golden eyes as he focused on the direction of the noise. It emanated from farther down the canal, echoing through the labyrinth of ruins. The brood sensed his alertness, stirring from their drowsy doze. They lifted their heads, peering down the waterway. The sound came again, sharper this time, followed by a resonant clang that reverberated among the columns. Drogon hissed softly, urging the brood behind him. They obeyed, but curiosity shone in their eyes. He advanced to the canal's bend, where tumbled blocks of stone jutted, forming a partial barrier. With a careful motion, he climbed atop the debris and peered down the length of the water. There, in a clearing framed by broken pillars, he spotted movement that made his muscles coil in immediate tension. A small band of figures milled about the edge of the canal. Humans. Their outlines were distinct, though they were half hidden by rubble. They wore mismatched garments, some pieces rusted metal, others ragged cloth, as though they had scavenged their attire from different places. One held a long pole with a hooked blade, using it to pry at the collapsed masonry. Another crouched by the water, filling a container. Beside them lay a battered skiff, moored to a chunk of stone. The skiff bobbed in the canal's gentle current, loaded with sacks and crates. Drogon caught the glint of steel in the midday sun. Perhaps swords or spears. The breeze carried faint voices, too distant to understand. But the tone suggested a mix of tension and eagerness. He snarled under his breath, smoke rolling from his nostrils. Men in Valyria were a rarity. Most who ventured here came for treasure or secrets, and often met dire ends. These had either braved the cursed waters, or found some hidden route through the peninsula. The brood caught sight of the skiff too, huddling behind Drogon. None of them had ever seen men. Their heads jerked in confusion, tongues flicking, as they tried to interpret the strange upright figures rummaging in the ruins. A surge of protective instinct thundered through Drogon's chest. Men had killed Daenerys, or at least one man with the face of a friend had delivered the fatal blow. He remembered the bitter tang of betrayal, the silent heartbreak as her eyes closed for the last time. He roared, a sound that vibrated the very stones around him. The brood echoed him, though their calls were higher, sharper. Instantly, the group of humans jerked their heads up in alarm. One dropped the pole with a clatter. Another scrambled to draw a sword. They glanced at each other, voices rising in panic. Drogon spread his wings, black and terrible, a living shadow rising above the debris. For a moment, the band of men seemed torn between fight and flight. Then one of them shouted, pointing. They rushed toward the skiff, pushing crates aside, fumbling for weapons. Drogon roared again, exhaling a stream of flame that engulfed the edge of the canal. The water steamed and boiled, sending a cloud of vapor skyward. The hatchlings flapped their wings, newly stirred adrenaline coursing through them. Bronzed jaws snapped with anticipation, while silver hissed, tail lashing. Yet Drogon held them back with a single, thunderous growl. He did not know what these men might carry in their crates. Perhaps crossbows or black powder weapons. He refused to let the brood charge blindly. At the water's edge, the men hurriedly cut the rope mooring the skiff. Two of them yanked on makeshift oars to turn the craft away from the canal bank. Another frantically loaded a crossbow, aiming in Drogon's direction. He caught the glint of the bolt's steel tip. With reflexes honed by battles, Drogon dove behind the debris, shielding the brood. A sharp twang sliced the air. The bolt clattered harmlessly against shattered masonry. The men's voices rose again, overshadowed by the hiss of the canal's churning water. Drogon felt the brood pressing around him, trembling with uncertainty. They were not cowards. He could sense their readiness to unleash flame, but they also sensed his caution. Men brought cunning and cruelty beyond mere beasts. If they had survived the cursed waters to reach Valyria's interior, they might be formidable. Another crossbow bolt thudded into the stone, shattering on impact. Drogon let out a furious roar, a vow that if they approached, he would annihilate them without mercy. The men, however, seemed more intent on retreat than conflict. Their desperate shouts and frantic rowing sent the skiff sliding deeper into the canal. One kept the crossbow trained in Drogon's direction, while the others maneuvered the skiff around rubble. Within moments, they disappeared around a bend, the echo of splashing oars fading into the distance. Drogon remained still, heart pounding, waiting. The brood crouched beside him, ears pricked, flames licking the edges of their jaws. Silence returned, broken only by the water lapping the banks and the distant calls of scattered waterfowl. He lowered his head, letting a growl subside in his throat. The brood relaxed marginally, though their eyes stayed fixed on the canal where the men had vanished. A tremor of disquiet rippled through Drogon's massive frame. He had believed the cursed nature of Valyria's ruins would keep men at bay. Yet here they were. If a small band had ventured this far, more might follow. Curiosity, greed, or desperation might lure them. The notion lit a flame of anger in him, but it was laced with an undercurrent of apprehension. The brood was growing, but they were not yet unstoppable, and men were cunning. They brought steel, guile, and hearts hardened by ambition. He hopped down from the debris, scanning for any sign that the men might have left traps or returned. The canal was still, the water reflecting the bright sky overhead. The brood sniffed the air and pawed at broken stones, unsettled. Drogon rumbled softly, urging them away from the canal. Reluctantly, they followed, casting backward glances at the water. Their father's tension suffused them. Even Bronze, boldest of the group, walked with his head low, scanning shadows. They traveled in silence through narrower streets, where the towering ruins leaned overhead like a forest of crooked pillars. Occasionally, a brood huffed or squeaked, uncertain how to process the encounter with humans. Drogon paused near a sunken plaza, glancing around for a safe vantage. He led them into the partial shelter of a collapsed hall, where fallen columns formed a roof of stone fragments. It was dark and dusty, but it offered concealment if men returned. The brood curled into the corners, panting from the heat and the rush of adrenaline. Drogon stood at the entrance, eyes fixed on the street beyond. Hours passed with no further sign of intruders. A few small creatures wandered by, lizards, rats, insects scurrying from the cracks. The brood snapped at them for a lazy meal, though they kept a watchful posture. Drogon's mind circled the memory of those men, the crossbow bolt, the frantic rowing, their ragged attire. Could they be pirates? Explorers? Treasure seekers rummaging for Valyrian steel or lost tomes of magic? The city's reputation didn't deter them, nor did the presence of a dragon, at least not immediately. It worried him. One day, the brood would be grown. But for now, they were vulnerable to cunning foes wielding weapons from afar. When the afternoon light softened, he emerged onto the street, scanning the horizon. No smoke signals, no distant campfire. The canal remained quiet, though the water was tinted orange in the late sun. The brood ventured after him, stretching cramped limbs and flaring their wings. Cautiously, he guided them back toward the dome, skirting the main avenues to avoid detection. They wove between broken walls, hopped over collapsed staircases, and took advantage of every patch of cover. The brood, sensing the gravity of the moment, did not bound ahead as usual. They moved in near silence, occasionally letting out low rumbles to stay in contact. By the time they reached the dome, dusk had settled in purple hues, the sky streaked with dying light. The mosaic floor welcomed them back, though it was little more than chipped patterns underfoot. In the gloom, the dais stood like a hulking wound, cracked and blackened from the storms that had raged months before. The brood gathered around Drogon, huddling in the center of the space. Normally, they would hunt before nightfall, But the encounter with humans lingered in their thoughts, sapping the simple joy of routine. Drogon lowered his body, extending a wing to wrap around the smaller forms, offering warmth and a semblance of security. The brood pressed close, burying their muzzles against his scales. Night deepened, and the hush of old Valyria enclosed them. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, or perhaps it was only a tremor in the volcanic fissures. The brood drifted to sleep in uneven intervals. Every now and then one would jolt awake, startled by a dream or the memory of men's voices echoing across the canal. Drogon did not sleep. He rested with eyes half open, scanning the shadows for any sign that an enemy lurked outside the dome. His mind flickered with old scars. The memory of Daenerys' final breath weighed heavy on him, fueling a protectiveness that bordered on desperation. He would not lose any of his brood the way he lost her. Hours later, the sky brightened with the first pallid hint of dawn. The brood stirred, each yawning and sniffing at the cool air. Sensing Drogon's restless energy, they rose, wings rustling, claws scraping stone. Without spoken language, they shared their wariness through subtle signals. Uneasy chirps, quick jerks of the head, glances toward the open archway. Drogon nudged them gently, guiding them out of the dome. If men still roamed Valyria, cowering in the shadows would serve no purpose. They needed to re-establish their dominance, to show that these ruins belonged to dragons. He led them to a wide terrace that overlooked a significant swath of the city. From this vantage, they could watch the canals and the labyrinthine streets for any signs of movement. The brood took flight in short bursts, flapping up to the battered ramparts. Morning light revealed a city that looked almost tranquil, columns gleaming in the sun, canals reflecting a pale sky, creepers draping gracefully from broken arches. Yet the hush had taken on a new edge of uncertainty. They spent hours perched there, scanning the horizon. Now and again, a drifting cloud of dust would rise, or a flock of black-feathered birds would pass overhead. But there was no sign of men, no echo of metal on stone. The brood gradually relaxed, taking turns practicing their flights around the terrace, snapping at insects that whirled in the rising warmth. Drogon watched them, thinking that soon they would be large enough to fly beyond Valyria's shores if they wished. Part of him dreaded that day. Another part accepted it as inevitable. Dragons, once grown, followed no will but their own. Daenerys had taught him what it meant to choose loyalty, though. Perhaps they would remain with him longer than he expected. By midday, hunger drove them to seek hunting grounds. They glided toward the petrified grove, mindful of further serpent lizards. They found none this time, but discovered a small herd of goat-like creatures that had wandered into the outskirts, perhaps drawn by a few patches of withered grass. The brood rejoiced in the chase, diving from above, steering the creatures toward Drogon, who struck with lethal precision. The kill was swift, feeding the dragons amply. Blood soaked into the dusty earth as they tore chunks of meat, devouring with hunger sparked by stress and fear. In that primal act, they reasserted their place in Valyria's hierarchy. No man could command them here, no lesser beast could stand in their way. After feeding, they returned to the dome. The day wore on, a relentless sun glaring from a cloudless sky. The brood lazed in pockets of shade, bellies bulging from the meal. A few belched small flames in idle contentment. Drogon hovered near the entrance, scanning the cityscape. His thoughts lingered on the men in the skiff. Where had they gone? Would they attempt to return under cover of darkness? Were they part of a larger group? The uncertainty gnawed at him. Late in the afternoon, he decided to investigate. Urging the brood to follow, he soared into the sky, beating his colossal wings in a steady rhythm. Below, the 5 younger dragons followed at varying heights, each straining to keep pace. They flew over the canal system, scanning for any sign of the boat. Glimmers of sunlight on the water shifted as they passed overhead. Nothing. No skiff, no men, no footprints along the banks. They followed the canal's twisting route until it led to the broken edge of a harbor that once might have birthed Valyrian ships. Now, it was a tangle of collapsed piers and barnacled pylons protruding from brackish water. Waves lapped listlessly at the rubble. The brood circled, peering into the depths. No sign of the skiff there either. Drogon guided them farther, across a portion of the peninsula that sloped down to jagged rocks. The sea roared against the black cliffs, sending spray high into the air. They soared past chunks of basalt carved into unnatural shapes by ancient lava flows. The brood reveled in the wide expanse, the open wind buffeting their wings. Yet Drogon's attention remained intent on the ocean. He spotted no vessel, no sails, nothing that suggested a human presence. Perhaps the intruders had fled altogether, terrified by his display of fire. He circled back, scanning once more. The sea horizon stretched empty. A faint haze marked where distant storms might gather. Reluctantly, he turned inland, urging the brood to follow. By the time they reached the dome, the sun dipped low, painting the city in molten shades of orange and red. Shadows stretched long, devouring the streets in creeping darkness. The brood settled around Drogon, their flight-weary limbs grateful for rest. One by one, they folded their wings and found a place in the nest. Soft crooning noises rose as they comforted each other against the lingering worry of the unknown. Night approached, yet no men emerged, no signs of their return. Perhaps they had truly gone, repelled by the horrors of Valyria. Or perhaps they scouted elsewhere, waiting for an opportunity. Either way, Drogon intended to keep guard. He curled up at the dome's entrance, gazing at the fractured dais in the gloom. The memory of lightning striking that ancient platform flickered through his mind, recalling how the city's dormant magic had once resonated. Now it lay silent and broken. He thought of Daenerys then, conjuring the image of her resolute face. She had carried so many hopes for the world, for those she sought to liberate. In the end, men had turned against her. Drogon rumbled low, smoke slipping from his jaws. Men would find no easy conquest here. As darkness fell, the brood shifted in their sleep, dreams shimmering behind closed lids. Drogon kept his vigil, peering through the cracked archway at the labyrinth of ruins. If intruders dared approach under the cloak of night, they would find a fierce reception. Hours passed, and the city remained quiet. Wind rustled the vines and distant steam vents hissed. Eventually, even Drogon's eyes grew heavy, lulled by the repetitive hush of the night. But each time he drifted close to slumber, the ghost of Daenerys' final moment pricked him awake. He would not succumb to complacency. Not when so much depended on his guardianship. The next days blurred into a routine of heightened watchfulness. The brood hunted in packs, expanding their territory. They soared farther from the dome, discovering new vantage points. Sometimes they glimpsed new creatures skulking among the ruins, twisted shapes that fled at the sound of roaring dragons. At night they returned to the nest, forming a ring of slumbering scales. Drogon circled the perimeter, scanning, but he saw no further sign of men. Despite the tension, the brood continued to flourish. Their scales hardened, shimmering in various patterns that reflected their heritage. Bronze, the largest, commanded the most attention among his siblings, bullying or leading them in hunts. Silver, swift and cunning, often outmaneuvered him, earning his grudging respect. The green-tinged male specialized in stealth, waiting until prey was cornered before striking the fatal blow. The remaining two developed their own quirks, one with a taste for aquatic hunts, the other fearless in lunging from high ledges. Together, they formed a fearsome young pack, each day forging deeper bonds and greater prowess. In time, Drogon felt their restlessness grow. They began venturing out to explore on their own. Some mornings, Silver and the green-tinged male would leave before dawn, returning hours later with evidence of a successful kill clinging to their jaws. Bronze, not to be outdone, took to roosting on a high tower near the dome, surveying a broad expanse of the city. Now and again, a distant roar signaled he had found something to chase. The others rushed to join him, leaving Drogon to watch from afar, half proud, half anxious. Their independence was necessary, but it also carried new risks. If men lurked in hidden corners, the brood could be ambushed. Drogon considered chasing them down, forcing them to remain together. But that went against the instincts he had learned from Daenerys. Dragons must discover their own strength, carve their own destinies. Seasons shifted again. The stormy weather returned, battering Valyria with thunder and lightning that illuminated the city's twisted architecture in flashes of brilliance. Rain fell in torrents, flooding certain low-lying quarters. The brood took shelter in the dome, or occasionally in other nooks they found across the peninsula, rarely straying far when storms raged. Amid these howling nights, the memory of the men in the skiff sometimes drifted back, but no sign of them appeared. If they had remained in Valyria, they stayed well hidden. When the rains finally subsided, revealing a sky scrubbed clean by fierce winds, Drogon emerged onto a spire that overlooked the southwestern quadrant of the city. The brood followed, some flying close, others gliding at a distance. The vantage revealed a deep sinkhole that had formed during the storm, a gash in the earth near a cluster of old towers. Rubble had caved inward, exposing the labyrinthine tunnels beneath. Curious shapes moved in the gloom, lit by sporadic bursts of volcanic glow. The brood, intrigued, let out a chorus of chirps. Drogon roared, signaling caution. Deep tunnels often housed dangerous creatures, or worse, pockets of toxic gases, but he could not deny the lure of new territory, especially if it harbored potential threats or prey. They descended in a spiraling approach, wings fanning wide. The wind carried the sulfuric tang of subterranean caverns. When they reached the sinkhole's edge, the brood peered over, flaring their nostrils. Steam wafted from the depths, and echoes of dripping water sounded far below. Bronze hissed, stepping toward a tilted slab that led downward. Silver followed, tail curling. Together, they advanced, each footstep kicking debris into the drop. Drogon landed behind them, letting out a short, commanding growl. They halted, heads turning to regard him. He advanced to the lip of the sinkhole, craning his neck. The opening descended into darkness, but the faint glow of molten rock flickered in hidden crevices. If anything lurked there, it might be formidable. As if reading his caution, the brood waited for him to lead. Drogon tested the slab with a powerful forelight. The stone groaned but held. Slowly he climbed onto it, then inched downward. His wings remained half unfurled for balance. The brood followed in single file, each testing their claws on the wet, shifting rubble. The temperature rose with each step, the air thick and humid. A hiss of steam billowed from a crack in the wall, making the dragons recoil. Drogon pressed on, navigating the labyrinth of tumbled stone until they reached a more stable pathway of basalt leading deeper underground. The corridor that stretched ahead bore markings in battered relief. Draconic symbols, swirling runes older than most living tongues. Glowworms clung to the walls, pulsing with faint luminescence, revealing glimpses of ancient inscriptions etched into the rock. The brood sniffed the air, enthralled by the otherworldly atmosphere. Droplets of moisture trickled from overhead, forming small pools along the path. Drogon advanced cautiously, each step a declaration of his presence. His eyes roamed the swirling designs, wondering if Daenerys would have recognized them as an ancestor to High Valyrian. Magic seeped here, a relic of the Empire's old grandeur. After several winding turns, they came upon a cavern that opened wide beneath the city. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, dripping mineral-laden water that sparkled in the glowworm light. A shallow lake spanned the cavern floor, fed by a thermal spring. Wisps of steam rose from the surface, obscuring the far edges. The brood gathered at the water's rim, peering at their reflections. Some tested the temperature with a claw. It was warm, inviting. Bronze, emboldened, stepped in, letting out a soft rumble of surprise. The water buoyed him, offering a gentle comfort. The others followed, swirling in the shallows, wings partially extended. Drogon remained on the shore, scanning for threats. The cavern air pulsed with a subdued energy that prickled his scales. He exhaled, sending a small flame across the water's surface. Steam curled upward. The brood squeaked, half in delight, half in awe. Then they paddled and splashed about, sending shimmering ripples across the lake. In that moment, the subterranean gloom seemed less oppressive, replaced by a rare note of enchantment. For a time, they forgot about the men, about the gloom of Valyria's ruins. They were dragons at play, lords of a hidden domain. Yet, as the brood drifted deeper, Drogon's wariness grew. Past the swirling steam, the cavern walls yawned into shadow. He waded after them, claws scraping the rocky bottom. The warm water sloshed around his haunches. With each step, he extended his neck, searching for any movement beyond the haze. A slow, rhythmic churning echoed in the distance, as if a colossal heart beat beneath the earth. The brood heard it too, their splashing stilled, heads pivoting. They gathered around Drogon, forming a protective ring. In the hush, a faint tremor rippled through the cavern floor. Bits of rock tumbled from the stalactites, splashing into the water. The brood lifted their heads, alarmed. Drogon spread his wings, letting out a cautionary hiss. Another tremor, stronger this time, rattled the cavern. In the swirling gloom at the far side of the lake, a shape began to stir. A mound of rock or rubble shifting, rising. The brood squeaked in fear and excitement, retreating behind Drogon. He roared, unleashing a line of flame that ripped across the water. The steam flared, momentarily revealing a behemoth form, scaled and ridged, rising from the lake's depths. The creature was gargantuan, at least as long as Drogon, if not more, with an armored shell, the color of volcanic stone. Its maw opened in a gurgling hiss, water streaming off its flank. A pair of black lidless eyes reflected the flames. Its limbs, thick and clawed, churned the water, sending waves lapping toward the brood. Drogon smelled the ancient reek of sulfur and decay. This beast had slumbered in the geothermal warmth, perhaps for centuries. Now, awakened by the dragon's presence, it coiled its thick tail and let out a grinding bellow, half roar, half groan of shifting earth. The brood scattered, wings beating the air, water churning around them. Bronze tried to circle around the creature's flank, but it lashed a forelimb, nearly catching him with a giant claw. Silver shrieked and climbed onto a jagged outcropping of rock, from which he spat a flame that splashed harmlessly against the creature's shell. The green-tinged male flanked Drogon, trembling. Drogon roared, stepping forward, flames building in his throat. In the flickering light, he saw an opening on the creature's underside, softer tissue near the joints of its limbs. He lunged, unleashing a concentrated blast of fire. The beast howled, thrashing in the water. But the flame didn't penetrate far enough to deliver a killing blow. A wave of steaming water slammed into Drogon, sending him stumbling. The brood hissed, trying to flank the creature as they had the serpent lizard. But this opponent dwarfed them, each thrash of its tail a threat to crush them against the cavern walls. Drogon refocused. Summoning all his fury, he inhaled, chest expanding. The brood recognized the shift. They retreated behind him, wings folded protectively. Drogon unleashed a torrent of flame so intense it turned the cavern's gloom into a flash of day. Steam erupted in clouds. Rock sizzled. The beast bellowed in agony, rearing onto its hind limbs, exposing more of its vulnerable underbelly. Drogon seized the opportunity, pouncing with savage force. His claws dug into the creature's flesh, where the shell parted at its abdomen. The brood added their smaller jets of flame, targeting the same spot. Heat and fury converged, and the beast's roars became choking rasps. Scalding water frothed around them as it collapsed, the cavern trembling with its death throes. For a moment, the brood remained poised to strike again, but the monster lay still, its final breath rattling through the dark. Drogon withdrew, steam swirling around him, water dripping from his scales. The brood came to his side, squealing triumphantly. Each drew ragged breaths, exhausted by the battle's intensity. The cavern felt suffocating now, the heat oppressive. They wasted no time turning back, scrambling to the corridor they had entered. Drogon lingered a moment, eyeing the defeated behemoth. If more creatures like that lurked beneath Valyria's crust, the brood would be tested again. Weariness crept into his limbs. They had discovered enough for one day. He guided them up the slanted slab, retracing their path. The brood groaned with fatigue, but they pressed on. At last, the broken surface of Valyria greeted them, the sinkhole behind them releasing a column of steam. Dawn had given way to dusk during their subterranean expedition, painting the sky a dim violet. They limped toward the dome, triumphant yet drained. If men lurked about, they made no appearance. None could have missed the roars echoing through the ground, but perhaps they hid or fled. For now, the brood had survived another of the city's hidden terrors. In the dome's hushed interior, they collapsed around Drogon, breathing hard, bodies aching from the ordeal. He stretched one wing to cover them, offering what protection he could. They had confronted men, serpent lizards, and a monstrous denizen of the deep, all in the span of a few weeks. Each challenge had honed their survival instincts, forging them into more formidable dragons. Yet each had also reminded Drogon of the dangers that might one day claim them, as a blade once claimed Daenerys. Night settled, bringing a slow lull. A patch of moonlight fell through the dome's fractured ceiling, illuminating the brood's huddled forms. They dozed in fits and starts, stirring whenever a faint sound broke the silence. No footsteps came, no rowdy shouts of men, no crawling monstrosities. Only the drip of water and the rustle of vines. Drogon gazed at the dais, lost in thought. Perhaps, in a distant time, Valyria had possessed the means to contain such terrors. Now it lay in ruins, reliant on a single dragon and his brood to guard what remained. At length, he settled his head atop his folded forelimbs, letting out a sigh that rippled across his chest. The brood nestled closer, lulled by his presence. He stared at the night sky visible through the shattered dome. Stars glimmered faintly. No queen stood at his side, no voice whispered her dreams of a better world. Only the scratch of memory haunted him. Yet in the rhythmic lull of his children's breathing, he found a measure of hope. Though men might seek to intrude, though horrors might lurk in the deep, dragons still endured. Their flames still burned, forging new stories among ancient ash. Morning found them stiff but alive, each bruise a testament to survival. The brood rose slowly, shaking off fatigue. Drogon guided them outside, letting the rising sun chase away the lingering shadows of the battle underground. They stretched their wings, seeking open air. Bronze roared at the horizon, an almost defiant salute to the day. Silver and the green-tinged male joined, their voices echoing. The rest followed suit, each cry a flame-touched breath, a vow that they would reign over these ruins, no matter what threats emerged. Drogon rumbled approval. He spread his own wings, launching into the brightening sky with a powerful thrust. The brood ascended beside him, forming a ragged V in the air, each beating wing stirring the dust that clung to Valyria's bones. They circled over the dome, scanning the city below. Age had corrupted this once great realm, but in their flight, they resurrected a measure of its ancient majesty. In the hush of a new day, with the sun gilding their scales, they reminded old Valyria, and the world beyond, that dragons were far from extinct. They soared outward, unchallenged, the brood weaving through columns of rising heat. Beyond the spires, the sea glinted. Perhaps men lurked somewhere on its surface, fearful or scheming. Perhaps more beasts awoke in the labyrinth of tunnels beneath Valyria's foundations. But for now, the sky belonged to dragons. Drogon and his brood carved a path through the air, each wingbeat a testament to resilience. Daenerys' dream had not perished with her mortal frame. It lived on in the thunder of their hearts, the roar of their voices, the blaze of their fire, promising that somewhere, in this land of ghosts, hope still burned.